People want so badly to know what's behind the mask. Front, back, recto, verso. Great art is both window and mirror. Whether it's your mask or theirs.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another delicious episode of the Furadashi podcast. I am your host, Lauren Ash, here with the lovely Nicholas. Please say hi.
Bonjour, mes amis. Bienvenue.
Bonjour, mes amis. As you can see from our beautiful French introduction, we are going to be talking about everybody's favorite top-of-the-mouth game, Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I am falling in love with this game more every single day. I feel like the music is straight out of Final Fantasy XIV meets Persona 5 meets, I don't know, classical music that like gets me into work mode. So it's very like good to focus and like get into the game.
Yeah, with some Edith Piaf thrown in there as well. Yeah.
Just everything. It's all over the place. And yet like because of that, it makes a concise whole. And I think that's what we're really going to focus on today is about how like you can kind of say everything and tell everything to the player about like its story, its themes, its world. And yet if you hide just enough, it ends up making it feel like it's a mystery and it's drawing you through.
You can say a lot and still have no fucking clue what's going on.
Oh, absolutely. And I can take a lot from this as a writer too. Like, hey, just say exactly what's happening. And then writers can be like, or readers, excuse me, right? Listening, right? We'll go, well, what did they mean by that? Is that what they meant? I'm not sure. And I think it definitely kind of flies in the face of like traditional narrative where like you're trying to build out story structure and build out plots over time. So it's been really great for me to play that there as well. And so what we will be doing is talking actually about Clair Obscur, which is the light and the dark, all of the hidden truths, the famous recto versus verso. So that's looking ahead and looking back.
Yeah.
And obviously the cycle, the loops, and like I mentioned, kind of the story structure and the overall world building, at least in today's episode. Were there any announcements that we wanted to make at the beginning of this before we kind of dive right in to Clair Obscur?
So I wanted to give you all just a brief rundown for the rest of this particular season of the Furidashi podcast. So in June, we're going to be talking about Ghost in the Shell. That is the 1997 film directed by Oshii. In July, we may or may not do Halo, depending on... Oftentimes we make random decisions at the last minute, and you guys just have to deal with it. And then for our final episode of this year's sort of like aesthetic treatment, we're going to be talking about Miyazaki Hayau's Kiki's Delivery Service, Majo no Takyubin. And after that, next season, I think we can announce this now since I've been working on it now for quite some time. We are going to be spending an entire year with our good friend, Kojima Hideo, and mostly, but not exclusively, talking about the Metal Gear series.
And I cannot tell you how looking forward I was this because a few months ago, Nicholas was like, Lauren, I have an idea for a new series and I don't know. I'm not sure if you'd be into it. And I'm just like, yeah, man, just shoot it at me. And suddenly it's like, so I just really want to do a full year talking about Metal Gear. And I was like, slams table. So I don't actually slam the table and ruin the mic.
Yeah.
I was like, sign me up. So it is super exciting to be able to finally announce that to you guys because it has been, a few months in the making here, and you've been working a lot on it. And I'm getting my whole wallet and my hours, my weekends cleared so that I can go back and either replay or sometimes in some cases play for the first time some of these games.
Yeah, because we're going to be playing all the old ones too. So that's I don't know if a lot of people have played Metal Gear 2. I mean, there's probably a lot of people who've played the original Metal Gear, either like on the Nintendo or the MSX or whatever that system in that Japanese like console system is called. But yeah, there's some games in there that aren't quite as well known, but they are also very interesting, and so we're going to talk about that. But
Yeah.
before we get into talking about the light and the dark, I also wanted to note that we have a Patreon, patreon.com/furidashi, where we will be continuing this discussion, but that's where more of the spoilery stuff will be. So if you want to stay spoiler fresh, we will do our level best in this particular episode to try and avoid major plot twists and use sort of generic examples. If we accidentally end up, spoiling something, apologies, but we are going to make a real effort in this episode. So bear in mind, though, if you are already finished with the game or well along and you want us to talk about those juicy little twists and tidbits, that will be in the Patreon episode.
And that'll be really exciting because then you'll actually get to hear some of it. I did want to let everyone know that I myself have not finished Clair Obscur. So I will definitely not be talking about any of those spoilery tidbits and will be using more of the general examples that you can get within Act 1 and Act 2. Both of those are kind of the highest kind of meaty point.
Yeah.
So that is a great call out on the spoilers here, because if you really want to hear about this game and what we think it actually does really well aesthetically and narratively, not just within its environments, but within its music, within everything, please keep listening and along. And if there is, and I myself will keep Nicholas in check, because I will be like, whoa,
Oh, hold on.
man. Yeah, so we'll get there. All right, so let's talk about the meaning of Clair Obscur.
Yeah. So, okay, so the title, so half the title, half of the title is pretty obvious what it means. It's Expedition number 33, which is, interestingly enough, is not the 33rd expedition. It is the 67th expedition, for reasons that are explained very, very early on in the game, because the numbers count down from 100 rather than up from 0. So Clair Obscur, what does this mean? It's a French term for something that in English is usually known by its Italian designation, chiaroscuro, which literally just means light dark or light and dark. What is chiaroscuro? It's basically an aesthetic principle that emerged out of the late Renaissance, although you see things like it earlier and later. And what's especially interesting is that it's an aesthetic that originally evolved from drawing, but I'm not going to get too much into that because that's just like the art history weeds. So what is this aesthetic? It's this idea that you have extreme contrast between darkness and brightness in a painting specifically. And so if you look especially at, say, like the works of Rembrandt or a lot of the Dutch painters of the late Renaissance, where within the given image, there will be sort of like a single light source, like a candle. And so you'll have parts of figures that will be very brightly lit, but then other parts of the figures that are basically almost in complete darkness. Or you'll have like a candle that will essentially be in the background of the frame, and then the figure in the foreground is essentially purely a silhouette, because it's essentially everything that surrounds them that is being lit, but you can only see their profile because like the figure itself is essentially black in the image, or like, shades of gray and so forth. So this aesthetic emerges a way to kind of both, there was a sort of an obsession with like light and optics, going from, say, like the late 16th century into the early 17th century, one that actually also informed a lot of philosophical ideas, probably the most notable being René Descartes, who originally wrote a theory of optics. And it was actually from his theory of optics that he wrote a lot of his more metaphysical works later on. And so with this in mind, there has always been this relationship between sort of like a basic visual aesthetic principle, like how you depict something in a painting specifically, but then it has always been married to these larger philosophical / metaphysical themes about like what the nature of reality is. And we talked about something like this previously when we discussed Edge Runners, and how we mentioned that in film noir, like the high contrast between light and dark, in the like printed film stock, then sort of corresponds to like the thematic things that are going on in those films, where like there are things that are known, that are unknown. They're typically mysteries or detective stories. And so that play upon the known and the unknown, like various metaphysical questions like what is real, what is not real, that is always in play, even when you're talking about this aesthetic in its visual form exclusively. Like you can't actually extract the one from the other.
And I think what's really great about kind of the definition of light and dark here is that this kind of going back all the way into the original kind of painting
Yeah.
to illuminate areas in order to show the darkness in others.
Yeah.
And so when we kind of take that metaphor and put it into the, say, the games itself and the game's title, like the game is all about illuminating one aspect or shining some sort of truth very clearly. I
Yeah.
think in an effort to kind of mask, honestly, everybody telling you what the story or what the reveal is going to be. Or in converse, it shows you exactly what the reveal is, and it tells you what the problem of the game is very early on in I guess it is Act 2. And then not to spoil it, when
I
you
think
get
I think
yeah,
we can spoil the end of Act
I
1. It happens
I think
pretty early. No, okay, we're not going to spoil it.
yeah, I was
Okay.
gonna say I'm not gonna spoil the end of Act 1, but basically say like one of your party members undergoes a transformation of sorts, but in doing so is quickly replaced by another main character,
Yeah.
right? And he pretty much like takes off. And I think and when I was playing it, I was like, oh, this is like the second, protagonist of the game. This is exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And yet in that moment is because there is like this big boss fight with kind of the antithesis of the protagonist, another say male figure,
Yeah.
right? That's older and very quickly like wrecked Expedition 33 when they got to the
Yeah.
actual like
I mean, Renoir
continent.
is
Yeah,
revealed in the
Renoir is there.
advertising. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's in the advertising. So you meet Renoir and you have that boss fight. And what I'm trying to say here very like delicately, but I won't dance around it, is that as soon as you see Renoir and spoiler happens and your protagonist switches, you're suddenly left with going, wait a second, did he just say this was like a family problem? And
Yeah.
then it's completely glossed over, or not quite glossed over, it's just never really brought up again because none of the other characters kind of were there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Mael, who is also in the marketing as well, Mael's kind of whole reaction was so traumatic that she, as well as a character, would not have been like, hold on, I was really analyzing Renoir's dialogue as he was speaking to us as a boss monologue.
Yeah.
Like, no, of course not. And so this is what we're talking about with the subversion, I think, in dialogue specifically, right? Is that it's telling you what's happening and they use dialogue very, very artfully to tell you this is exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Nicholas, from your perspective, like speaking of the Renoir, like reveal, right,
Yeah.
moment that happened there, I like reveal for the player. I would be curious, like, are there elements of this that you've seen in the art as well? Because I can think of quite a few, particularly around like revealing something in a Nevron or revealing something in like you actually get to a location, you start seeing something that makes
Yeah.
you as a player wonder.
Yeah, I think so. Like, actually, this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the game, because
Oh yeah.
curiously enough, the game doesn't actually tell you very much about its mechanics. It's pretty circumspect about a lot of actually very important things. So the game will tell you, so like, you have an encounter, you run into some Nevrons, you do the Final Fantasy switch to like the turn-based combat, and the game tells you, it's like, okay, yeah, certain Nevrons have weaknesses, and that's kind of all it tells you. It's like they have weaknesses, and you actually have to like figure out. Interestingly enough, there are visual cues on a lot of them that kind of give you an idea as to what their weakness will be. Like, so for example, the big sack of potatoes guys, like that's sack of potatoes.
Yes, yes.
The big gestural creations, like, they have certain parts of their body, like joints that like are sort of glowing, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, glowing part of the body, that's pretty
That's a
obvious. That's
weakness.
pretty
Yeah.
obviously weakness. But in other instances, like, there will not be anything especially conspicuous about the Nevron that like tells you like, oh yeah, that's exactly where the weakness is. So you actually do have to engage in a little trial and error, and in many cases very closely examine the design of the Nevron itself to try and determine what actually on it might be conspicuous, what more subtle aspects of its design may be telling you that like, oh, this is where its weakness is.
Yes, I actually love that because I think that for me, the most intuitive weaknesses are the ones that like players just know from shooting.
Yeah.
And so, for example, like I got to one of the there are like bosses in this game, so I got to one of the say boss islands, if you will, and there are just these floating creatures and these ballerinas
Yeah.
that I was like, oh shit, like my melee party is just not gonna handle them pretty well.
Yeah.
But so I augmented everybody with their shooting. And I was like, I'll just do a bunch of headshots. And of course, sure enough, right, headshots are obviously what matters.
Yeah.
But not every creature in Clair Obscur has a head.
Or
So,
even has their head be their weak point.
or has their head be their weak point. There's actually
Yeah.
quite a few that you actually need to shoot the things that are floating around them and not
Yeah.
actually them. Because if you can shoot that, it then triggers an explosion which damages the enemy to their adjacent area, usually their
Yeah.
left or their right, depending on which side, right, you shot the thing.
Yeah.
Another alternative is like there is this creature with tons of eyes. So
Yeah.
obviously shooting a person in their eye would probably be a weakness.
Yeah.
But then you have to ask yourself, well, which eye
Yeah.
is the weakness?
And
I think
are you talking like the big like threat like yarn ball guys?
yeah, there's like these yarn ball guys. Well, they end up being
Yeah.
so easy for me because I didn't realize that when I went to that place second, like that whole encounter was just too easy because after doing it once with like the other areas,
Yeah.
I would just say that I kind of had learned at that point. But like you mentioned, right, I had to like investigate. I had to look closer. I had to like learn about the enemy, which is the point of Clair Obscur, right?
Yeah.
They're like, look at this creature with a bunch of eyes. Okay, the biggest eye might be a weakness, but actually this other eye over here that you can't hit with every character because of the angle
Exactly. Yeah.
of the game, right? Is obscuring
Yeah.
the model. Oh, like
Yeah.
anyway,
Like what is hidden and what is apparent is
what is a
like,
hidden?
is there in a very basic
Yeah.
mechanical sense. And so another good example of this is like, so there are these, they're called paint cages, I believe is the in-game term for
Yes.
what are essentially chests. But to unlock these chests, you have to hit 3 sort of glowy ball things that are sort of like hidden around the landscape. And the thing is, even though they will all be within relative proximity of where the paint cage is, you have to constantly shift your perspective on the environment around you in order to find them. So this is another example of where sort of like the 3-dimensional design both like reveals and that you can see them, but you have to like, but others will, if you can see one, others will be occluded, will be hidden. So you have to move yourself around in a dynamic sense to look at the environment itself from multiple perspectives. And I wonder if maybe that's thematically related to the fact that you have to look at events of the game from multiple perspectives. Is that a thing that could possibly be the case? I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But this works. But this is what we're trying to
Which
say.
means
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. No, which
Yeah.
is really interesting. So this actually brings me to a point that I did want to mention. And I thought I was going to mention it more in our kind of like the looking ahead, looking back point, but I actually think I should bring it up here. And I'm going to talk about the level design and or the lack thereof with a question mark. Because I feel like this game, when we talk about exploring hidden truths, right? The traversal, the exploration, and all of the world building of this game really does like highlight you to go straight to the boss. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that I'm saying that loosely as a blanket statement because it is definitely not always true if you've played this game.
Yeah.
Because it is so easy for me to get lost if I do not open the map, use the compass, reorient myself to where I am in the world, use all of the tools and the perspectives in order to figure out where I am, particularly in the overworld.
Yeah.
And in some of these Act 2 locations, I got lost like for 30, 45 minutes. Like I am not kidding because I forgot that I had like a compass or I forgot the direction and dialogue that someone told me to go.
Yeah.
Or there wasn't once you get into a level, unlike the overworld that has like a marker on the map.
Yeah.
Once you get into a level, there is no mini map.
There's
So
no
instead
there's no
of
map period.
there's no map
There's no
period.
objective markers. There's nothing.
There's nothing. And so that's why I wanted to talk about the level design and or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Because there are certain maps where I just feel that there was no level designer. Like there was just a world.
Give me an example of this then, because I think I
Yeah.
know where you're going. But
So a traditional map and a traditional level design is very telegraphic, telling players this is the way to go, say, to the boss. And so when I made the blanket statement of I do feel like the levels have some level design in that there is usually, if you just keep going forward.
Yeah.
Okay. This is why I thought I was going to be in Reco Verso. If you keep going forward and you never look back, you never look at any other areas. One of the boss maps entirely is really good at this and saying there are alternate paths for you to take, but this one leads to the boss. Like that's the heavy-handed, you could say, level design, game design approach, right?
Yeah.
If you take this path as seen by camera cutscene, you will get to the boss. And that one particularly is just a straight level straight to the boss.
Yeah.
But if you explore the alternate paths, even in those alternate paths have a very straight line to the boss. However, it is better for you to explore, say, the whole area and uncover the mysteries, because there are things within this world that are like helping, say, Nevrons that aren't, say, a hostile immediately.
Yeah,
there
or
are
not at all in some cases.
Or not at all. There are manor doors, because there is, say, the manor is a very big theme in the game. And there are doors that are locked when you first uncover it. And you can unlock them by finding them scattered throughout the world.
Yeah.
And that's why I say I think need things like guides, because even for myself, I would say traditional level design is very good about gaining the skills to unconsciously guide players towards those secrets, because you want them to discover those secrets. And when I have played maps built by those who haven't built their career around like unconsciously guiding players via terrain, I play maps very much like the more open-ended spaces in Clair Obscur, where there are handholds to get into another area. And you're like, ooh, look, little traversal puzzle. And then you get to that area and you're like, but why am I here? And some instances are better than others. And that's why I'm talking about this level design or lack thereof, because Clair Obscur does have level designs. Do not get me wrong. They do have maps. Do not get me wrong. And yet there are many moments where I get to a place and all of the surrounding architecture and world building is so similar, but there's none of the traditional, you could say, studied or practiced landmarking to get me back to a location. And I think that's why I said let's talk about it, because if I don't look back, because I have to keep looking back as I play through the level to know how to progress forward. And then also if I just progressed forward and didn't explore, didn't look around, I actually might be better off in just getting the main story, and I'm using scare quotes here. Because I would actually miss out on all of the hidden secrets of the world that are actually a part, honestly, of the main story. And that's why I describe this as, is this a happy accident? Or is this,
I don't think it's an accident. I think it's very
or how intentional, right? And the spectrum of intentionality. Because I think that if I was to bet, I feel like it's actually like 60-40. Like in some instances, I can see there's very clear telegraphing and there's very clear going to. In order to do what I am talking about, you have to have level design in your skill set, whether you're an artist or a designer or a narrative designer and you know Blender. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, these are all just skills. They're not titles, okay? But then on the other hand, I feel like sometimes I get to a place and I'm like, man, they did a really good job of making this a circle. This feels like a Clover 4-way on an American highway where you could just exit for infinity. But also, they did not tell you how to get out. Like, I had to search for the one tiny crevice to get out. Feels good, like feels intentional, but doesn't always feel good as a player. And I guess that's what I'm getting at, right?
So I think we can address this question from at least two perspectives, or at least these are the two that I want to think about. So one is to think about it from a design perspective as sort of like, UX or sort of like a UXy approach to level design. You sort of like the more handholdy, like, hey player, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to do, and I'm going to design the level in a manner so as to like facilitate a clear through line for like a gameplay and for traversal, versus an attempt to try and think about environments as an aesthetic slash like philosophical principle. So the aesthetic principle, I think, is pretty straightforward, which is that, like, okay, if you have a game in which you really want to encourage your player to explore as broadly and as thoroughly as possible, because, like, the journal entries are hidden all over the place. A lot of the pictos are hidden all over the place. A lot of, like, power up stuff is all over the place. And so, like, there's the clear reward, but then the question is, how do you actually get the player to do that, even if perhaps there isn't necessarily an explicit reward for doing so? And so that's why I think they take away the mini map. They take away the objective markers. They take away the just like map that you can then go to another screen on and sort of like look at roughly where you're supposed to go. Because then going to the metaphysical slash thematic side of things, what is the sort of the subjective condition of the characters who are your sort of like collective avatar? They are literally making a voyage into the unknown. A path has been laid for them by previous expeditions, and this point is emphasized over and over and over again. But they don't necessarily have access to that information from other expeditions unless they go look for it. And that's in the story. That's right there
Yes,
in
that
the
is.
story.
It is right there in the story.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Please
then
finish your point. Yeah.
So then if you want to reinforce that for the player, then in many ways, mechanically, you will want them to have to do similar things. And this ties back to what we were saying previously about like discovering weaknesses, the various nevrons that you fight. You have to actively explore what is going on, both environmentally in terms of the level design, as well as conceptually. Like, the game wants you to know more, but the game isn't going to tell you what more is. The game is saying more is available to you. More knowledge, more understanding, more power-ups, more like better gear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to go look for it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you actually triggered the thought that I think brings this all together for me, which is that level design as user experience versus level design as aesthetic. And I love that because as I'm talking in my level design Discord right now, there are so many talks around how quest designers and environment artists slash like world builders exist, but games in AAA are moving away from level design as a practice. And level design really was about the user experience with the knowledge of aesthetics, like working very closely with artists to be like, hey, this is something where we want to encourage exploration, or we need to take things away because. And you see this, and let me give you an example of, especially like in the Tomb Raider or the Uncharted games, where there are mini maps, there are a lot of these UI elements. There will be specific, you could say, narrative moments where we do strip things away from the player and force them in the dark cave with only their flashlight because it's a weak moment and they need to get out. And you as the player are like, I feel confined, I feel constrained. And it is because we can turn those features off in the game.
Yeah.
And so many AAA games, though, now, particularly with the move with open world, live service, multiplayer, all of that, you can't turn elements like a minimap off in a multiplayer match. Or can you? Right?
Yeah.
And so I think what Nicholas triggered for me is that what I definitely just realized now in you talking is that in order to get the gameplay rewards, a lot of them are gated by gameplay itself. You have to battle to get a new Pictos.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that you have to battle to get a new expedition journal entry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
those are just there. Yeah.
Those are just there, but they're only there if you search for them. And so it's like seeking knowledge will get you knowledge. It's a very like win-win.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Seeking combat will get you better combat. And I think that's actually really fascinating because I actually haven't seen another game do it that explicitly and that often before until you mentioned it. Because I basically have been playing every single night for 2 or 3 hours and with a new kitten. And so I have been learning how to dodge and parry with a cat jumping across my television screen.
Yeah.
And this dangling feather, do not know how I've done this. I have tried so much, I've actually broken the UI. So I have found out that they're using 3D UI widgets, everybody. They're using the 3D UI placed widgets on the
I will
character
say
models in the
that
game.
I have a
It's
lot of
very
UX,
cool.
I have a lot of UX complaints about this game, but I'm going to sort of set
No,
them
we're going to
aside.
save that for, I don't know, our own personal chats, because we want to highlight, as this season is about narrative and aesthetics and the overall aesthetics and not the mechanics, there is something still very clever in the use of gameplay equaling a gameplay reward. So you do gameplay to get gameplay, if that makes sense. And you do traversal to get traversal.
Yeah, well, not only that, but also like think about it from an artist's perspective. Like, this game is gorgeous. Like I
It is gorgeous.
I can't even begin to explain just how incredibly fucking beautiful it is. If you're an artist and you create these elaborate environments, like incredibly rich in color, in texture, like, you know, various height levels and like sight lines and like really interesting sort of occlusions, you want your player to actually look at that stuff. And so then if you discourage exploration, if you just create the clear like objective marker through line, like you follow like the little diamond on your compass and you just, you know, you beeline straight towards the end, you're not really looking at one of the primary aesthetic components of this game. This game is like very at its core says a great deal about the nature of art, like what is beautiful, what is ugly, what is sort of maybe like riding the line between those two things, both emotionally and visually. And in order for the player to actually experience that, you need to really find a way to encourage that kind of exploration, because it's not just about the mechanics. It's not just about like, oh, I have to figure out where all of the light balls for like this paint cage are, or like I need to figure out what this Nevron's weakness is. Part of it is literally just like there were moments in this game where I just looked at the fucking sky. Like I just pointed the camera up and I just looked at what was above me because it's fucking beautiful. And like that is part of the experience of the game. It's saying to the player, and I don't want to put no, actually I do want to go here. It's saying to the player that like aesthetic appreciation is gameplay. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people really understand. And I think it's why some games, particularly like visual novels, get a lot of crap, because they're unwilling to think of aesthetic appreciation as a form of gameplay. Whereas this game is saying, no, it is. Look at this shit. It's fucking gorgeous. Stop running around and just look at the pretty things for once.
I think aesthetic appreciation as a gameplay mechanic is such an powerful statement in today's climate of game design.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because so much, as a designer myself, and as someone who did study art as a part of being a designer. So for example, I studied low poly art instead of, say, high poly art. And I do say that because I started at the cusp of world builders and level designers splitting, truthfully.
Yeah.
There were designated environment artists, but I also started right when level designers were somewhat expected to know how to model in Maya or model in 3ds Max.
Yeah.
Which is, people don't even know what that is. Basically Blender, okay? But imagine it really pricey and gatekeepy and worse to use. Yay. But I had to basically prop modeling, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say this is before dedicated prop modelers, those existed, but you are kind of expected to be a bit of a jack of all trades as a level designer, which is why I really liked it. I can write and get it all the way into game. Perfect. I know how to do cinematography. Sure. I can do actually map building and just gray boxing, and someone else will paste their art over it. Also good. Oh, I need to learn how to model some crates. Those are boxes. Easy peasy. Texturing, stuff like that. But for me, I wasn't doing it for aesthetics, right? I was doing it for functionality because, frankly, I was not an artist. And what you said right there with aesthetic appreciation can be the game, right? That can be the design approach. That is exactly what I think is making Clair Obscur stand out in this sort of aesthetic appeal, is that there are so many times throughout the world that I get frustrated, there is friction. I am upset because I just keep tripping over the collision on those gosh darn corpses
Yeah.
throughout the world.
Yeah.
And that is an aesthetic statement. That is,
Yeah.
I am so upset that I keep having to navigate around the dead bodies of my fallen comrades.
Yeah.
That should stop you in your tracks as a player, but especially for myself as a game designer. Like, we continue, not if one of us as a game designer falls to layoffs or to burnout, not
Yeah.
if, when.
Yeah.
When one of us falls, we continue. I kind of had to take like a 1-day break just so that I could come over that, because I was getting frustrated on some of the collision. And if this was in a Microsoft, Sony, right, sort of appeal, you would have some random game director telling you that, and they're very removed from the game, just so we're clear.
Yeah.
As someone who has worked with game directors like one-on-one, and I actually love all my game director friends. None of you have ever done this, like, bless you. But you would get someone so far removed that they're like, hey guys, we really got to reduce the collision on these corpses
Yeah.
because players keep getting stuck on them and it is functionally frustrating.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes art is supposed to be functionally frustrating because it makes a statement. And that's why I really, really am loving this game. Not because, I would say I'm the best at the mechanics. I'm not. And not because
neither am I, don't worry about it.
Yeah. Thank you. Right? Not because like, oh, this is like the most innovative game I've ever seen. Like, I've never experienced this combat before. Reed, I definitely have. Like, yes, the soundtrack is great. There's a lot to gush about this, but I think the biggest thing for me to gush about is those no mini map, no waypoints, super frictioned corpses that you're tripping over, and it has to stop and make you think. Or you just get frustrated at it and you don't think about it. But I think even the dumbest players after a while would be like, why is it so hard to run on this ground? Oh, it's the corpses in my way. And then, oh, those are people I used to, in the game's narrative, okay, those are people that you used to know that you could have sent off, even if they're eons and eons before. And that was a little bit of a rant on the corpses, but I think that there is body horror everywhere. They throw it in your face.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of blood and gore in this game.
There's a lot of blood and gore in this game. They do content warning it as well.
Yeah.
So it is incredibly, it's incredibly in your face, but in a beautiful way, like in a very tasteful way, in an artistic way, I would say.
Well, and also in an emotionally arresting
yes,
way as
in
well.
an emotionally arresting way, not in a way that's continue.
I have an example of this. It's very early in the game. It's with Gustav. So, the expedition leaves Lumiere. They arrive, and this isn't really a spoiler since it happens very near the beginning of the game. But like, you get decimated on the beach when you show up.
Yes, and I did say that earlier in the episode as well. Is that you get decimated?
Very, very, very few of your expeditions survive, and in fact, it gets down to the point where basically just what would that be? 4 of you survive. And so near the beginning of Act 1, there is this moment where so Gustav is moving through this like meadow that is pristine, beautiful. Like, there's dappled sunlight coming in through the trees. Like, there's all kinds of flowers and then, colors in the grass. And then you go into this cave, and inside of this cave is literally just like the tortured, mangled bodies of all of the people who've literally just died, and they're being sort of sucked into some kind of like grotesque thing that almost seems to be like draining their bodily fluids. It's really quite gross.
And it's like a life tree.
Yeah.
The metaphor of life tree is so high because of the way they're scattered like roots, and then you kind of follow them in.
Yeah.
And then they all go up to the ceiling.
And Gustav sees this. At this point in the game, he's still by himself. And he just loses it. Like, he flops down against a pile of bodies. In fact, the woman sitting right next to you, basically with like a giant, it's not even clear what it is, but it's like impaled her, is a woman that you had an extensive conversation with in the prologue as you're about to set out. Like, they have just brutally murdered this person who, like, the prologue has kind of signaled to you may be someone who is relevant later. And it's like, no, it just murdered them. And Gustav can't take it. And like, again, I feel like it's okay to spoil this. Like, he nearly kills himself.
Yeah.
And what stops him is Lune arrives, and she essentially tells him to like get his shit together. And that like this was going to happen. And that's where sort of like because it's almost repeated as kind of like a mantra, when one of us falls, we continue. But at that moment, it's really conveying to you what the stakes of that are. And the fact that like they can't really act individually, they have to act collectively. And that there are going to come times when it will actually fall apart. And so going back to this idea of like sort of just the arbitrary frictions in the game is telling you very early on, this is not going to be a smooth gameplay experience. You're going to have a hard time, and not necessarily in like the Dark Souls way where it's just sort of like repetitive frustration, but where like the frustrations are something terrible happened, you fucked up, but we continue. The game continues. We collectively, as the expedition, continue. You, the player, must continue. You have to like deal with the fact that that impediment is there and that there's not actually a clear resolution to it. And in fact, the themes of suicide kind of are not quite as explicit as that moment, but they do recur throughout the game. And so there is this idea of like, how do these characters grapple with facing what may in fact be ultimately futile? And they don't always come off well. And you, the player, are not necessarily going to always come off well. And like, that's something you have to kind of sit with. So there, then sort of like this idea of like this grotesque thing, as Lauren said, also being presented to you as kind of like a tree of life. It's this idea that there is no clear distinction. There is no like clear light and dark between the bad things and the good things. Like they are going to be inextricably bound up in each other. And that's sort of like the idea of like Clair Obscur as this visual aesthetic that is based in contrast. But then the question is, what is sort of the thematic and emotional resonance of the contrast in the text itself, in the game? And that's not always clear. And the game kind of doesn't tell you. It suggests, it hints, but also at the same time, its hints often point in completely divergent directions. So then the question becomes, okay, well, are both of these things true? This character was revealed to be a liar, but in lying, it actually says more about who they are and why they're significant in the story. So if we didn't find out that they were lying, and if we didn't have the lie in the first place, they wouldn't have the importance that they have. And that's a thing that you have to grapple with. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I think it's got a lot of, like you mentioned with the suicide, and right there to piggyback off of the lying, making them important almost because they knew you wouldn't trust them if they hadn't lied.
Yeah.
I think that right there is the kind of thoroughfare of the complex themes that this game is able to, I don't want to say only make work. That's not quite true. It's not only, but is able to justify them working in such good tandem because they have that strong Clair Obscur in their name, but also as their metaphor, but also, and in addition, is their narrative aesthetic choice.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that it is literally in the game. It is literally in the game, as in the grayscale moments, and those there are gradient moments or gradient attacks or gradient counters that you learn relatively.
Well, you learn them in Act 2.
You learn them in Act 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, I guess I care less about like mechanic spoilers than I do narrative spoilers.
I don't think that's much of a spoiler, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. But you do see like the gradients in the cutscenes as well. So like they will black and white the cutscenes. You also see the complex themes of growing up without parents.
Yeah.
Right. And especially because of the Gamage, which is where everyone will die once the number on the pillar is reached. Right.
Yeah.
That's also very, very early on. But then you have these really crazy fights with mimes that will give you outfits maybe sometimes.
I do love the outfits. I love the outfits.
I've only beaten like 2 or 3 mimes, and I missed the one in the beginning.
The outfits don't always come from the mimes.
And the outfits don't always come from the mimes, to be fair.
Yeah.
You can sometimes buy the outfits, you can find the outfit, you can complete a jumping puzzle that takes you 45 minutes and get the best Gestural outfit, in my opinion. So just FYI, everyone else in your party will look great, and then you'll have that one guy. Yes. It's fantastic. I also found an outfit that makes me look like Orin. Sorry for this tangent.
Yeah.
But I basically have a beret, sunglasses, and the Orin outfit. So I am basically just Orin from Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
To really channel my Final Fantasy party vibes, the funny one, the emo one, and then the hot women. So that is my party aesthetic. But excuse me. Yes, as we're saying though, right? It's not just the complex themes of like death and despair and right moving on in the face of seeing those horrific kind of like actions either happening to you or hearing about them from others, right? We've all probably in our lives lost a loved one or have felt we have lost someone close to us, whether it doesn't have to be death, right? It can also just be growing apart.
Yeah.
Moving away. Physically, Expedition 33 does move away from all their loved ones. They don't think they're ever going to return. But I also want to mention that it's the complex emotions of that joy and of that happiness are always in contrast with the reality of what is like Gustav's mission supposed to actually be, or what are Mael and Lune actually like. Is the ending that they want to get actually going to be the happy ending that they think it's going to be, or is it truly just going to lead to more tragedy? And I think that you have to see that the complex emotion of joy, happiness, what brings us happiness is also just as important. If we're going to look at the light and the dark, I know we've been looking at the dark a lot, but I think what the moments of joy stand out even more so, I think, in this world, particularly around seeing Mael and another character playing the piano. Seeing Mael, when you get to her, she's like, oh, I was just hanging out in this room. That's the only room in the manor open. I've totally been fine this whole time.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm having a good time because I made this new Gestural friend. And you're like, what the fuck is a Gestural?
Yeah.
Why are we here? And then you go somewhere else and you're like, this is fun. Everyone's dancing around at camp. Everyone makes jokes.
Yeah. Or
right?
SKA, or just SKA period.
Or just SKA period. SKA is fantastic. I met him, was like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why you're here. This is dumb. And he just grows on you because he's so jovial. And there's a whole conversation actually about how he's a little wee woo. And that's all I'm going to say. And it's because he is both joyful and knows that he can have the sadness inside of him.
Yeah.
And he tells you that he chooses the joy.
Well, he also,
right?
if I remember if we're thinking about the same conversation, he also says pretty explicitly, he's like, no, I'm never mad. Like I never get upset. I can be all sorts of other things, but I'm never mad at anyone. And it's really kind of interesting to sort of like think about a character in this world where everything is just so dire, who's like, no, I'm having a good time. Things upset me from time to time and I might get sad, but generally speaking, or I might get a little weird, but generally speaking, like I enjoy life.
Yeah.
And that's like in this thing where, like, as Lauren was saying earlier, with like, you're literally tripping over bodies, you're literally surrounded by death. You have this major character, like a sort of pseudo companion who's like, no, life is great. Life is worth living. And there are things that are really wonderful about this strange, exotic world that I inhabit.
And what I love is that for me, it's like, be the SKA you wish to see in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, seriously, because life is dark and is depressing. And I think Clair Obscur does a really great job of not just saying in that world, right, when one falls, continue, but it is also going, and in this world, you can still have fun and absurdity and levity. And I think that's really kind of the point that you highlighted really there, that this world is shit, but I'm living a good life. He's like, yeah, I lose my rocks, but it's because if I don't sacrifice this part of me that makes me more powerful, we don't get to have fun together.
Yeah.
And cheering you up is more important to me than being able to, say, traverse this world in like the ways that I, I as an all-powerful wine-filled entity
Oh
am
yeah,
able to do.
it's made
Yeah.
very clear early on that SGA is probably the most powerful creature in the entire world, aside from like, the major bosses.
Yeah, but he loses his rocks in the same way in that he like someone loses his marbles. Like
Yeah,
he's a little crazy. And
yeah,
yet he is also the one that says the most telling things about the narrative. Once again, right? It's the in plain sight. And
yeah,
yet also it's not quite a red herring. A red herring is you say something to divert the player's attention
yeah,
or the reader's attention in order to obfuscate the actual, like make players think that that is the what's about to happen. SK is not red herring you.
no,
He's
no, no,
just
no,
so I just want to be super clear that when I say that, SK will just say things and will make players wonder, oh, is that an important detail? But SK will just say things about the narrative pointedly and yet say nothing at all about it because he's like, oh, that's just the truth, right?
yeah,
But I don't have to explain the truth because it's like no one explains why the sky is blue every day. So
yeah,
I'll just say a thing. And then you dialogue response with, what did you just say? And he's like, huh, I don't know why you would want to know why the sky is blue. That's not important right now. Let's go back to talking about my rocks because that is like, you need to find a rock for me or you need to do these things or let's just talk about other things. And so I didn't think we would actually talk about SGA this much, but I do actually believe that he is the
the Claire, yeah,
the
yeah.
Claire to everyone else's Obscura, if that makes any sense, right?
I will say
Like
you think that because you haven't gotten to the end game.
I
Because
have not gotten to the end game. And that's what I'm saying is that
yeah,
he
he is both. He
says
is both.
things.
He
He
is
is
both.
both.
Yeah.
No, he is definitely going to be both. And that's what I'm saying is, but he's not red herring you about it.
Oh
He
no.
is the most powerful. It once again, there are I'm not even going to speculate on here. One, because I haven't finished it. And I tend not to speculate with Nicholas anyway, because then Nicholas will de-speculate me, but then that will lead me to the truth and then I'll
Yeah,
spoil
yeah, exactly.
myself. And so
Yeah.
we tend not to speculate, everyone. And I'm not going to speculate in front of you either. But what I am going to say is in Act 1 and Act 2, Eskie is presented as this light-hearted, light, Claire, like illuminating force of joy.
Yeah.
Because all of the others really don't see the joy for themselves or need to be forced into joy. And there was another character that honestly does do some self-harm to themselves that brings joy in a lighthearted way, I promise. That sounded
Yeah.
very weird. Out
Yeah.
of context, that's very strange.
Yeah.
But this let's without spoiling it, let's just say that it's all in good fun. It's a game, guys. It makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that it plays with those ideas. And so recognizing that sometimes when you tend to talk about games that are very heavy in themes, I just want us to recognize that like in order for them to be good at the heavy, they also have to be good at the light.
Well, yeah, and I think I don't know if this is necessarily where you're going, but it made me think of the fact that like nothing in this game is a distraction.
Mhm.
There are a lot of different kinds of things that you can do, especially once you get to sort of like the middle portion of Act 3 where like all of the side stuff really opens up. And so, but the thing is that at no point is any of it kind of not ultimately connected to sort of, well, I don't even want to say that connected, because really what it's doing is that it's not distracting you. Is that like, it's a very different approach to world building. And that each time you do one of these things, you flesh out another piece of the world. And that piece of the world is always going to have some either implicit or explicit connection back to sort of, as Lauren said, the quote unquote main storyline. And Esquier is another example of this. Like, he's not, in order to get sort of like the complete picture, or not even the complete picture, a more complete picture, because you still never get everything. In fact, a lot remains hidden from you, even at the end. In order to get a more complete picture, these supposed like side quests and side missions and side things that you can do, or like seemingly ancillary things, never end up quite being purely ancillary. They end up filling the sort of the conceptual space, the aesthetic space, everything
Yeah.
that's going on.
So I guess let's kind of talk about that to kind of end us out here, because I
Yeah.
was kind of going to that end of when we talk about things in Clair Obscur, we
Yeah.
are really talking about both sides, say, of a single coin, right? Two
Yeah.
faces, looking at things from all perspectives, to use
Yeah.
your phrasing. And I think that's really where we should continue to end with, even without spoiling it. What Nicholas is able to articulate for us here is that each element and each dialogue line, each small section of a world, and particularly when you do meet this kind of bystander known as the fading man,
Yeah.
this bystander figure, the way he talks about what has happened is his own personal reflection.
Yeah.
And yet, ultimately, if you never speak to him, you'll still get a semblance of the story.
Yeah.
But will you get, say, a total understanding through your own subjective perspective of
Yeah.
what the story is? And I think that's really what Nicholas is highlighting here, is that it's not just the multiple perspectives that we have to understand. I'm really curious, Nicholas, as we talked about the world building and the Clair Obscura, is like, how does that relate now, right, to the whole, say, cycle, right?
Yeah. So
And all of those perspectives. And I think ending there is going to really highlight us really just diving into why is this game called Clair Obscur,
yeah,
and not just Expedition 33.
I will say I think there's something deceptive about the word contrast. Because the thing is, one way you could look at the sort of the aesthetic / emotional / metaphysical concept of light and dark is as two separate domains that are kind of juxtaposed against each other. And against is really the operative word there. That there's this idea that they represent two completely distinct domains that are in clash with one another. But if we go back to that point that I originally made about sort of like where this aesthetic principle came from, we're talking the sort of light and dark elements are part of a whole composition. And they only really make sense with each other. In other words, they're not opposed. They're not contrasted in sort of the lay sense in which most people would normally think of that, but they're contrasted in the sense of like they almost have a kind of like dialectical relationship. They're opposed, they're conceptually from one perspective opposed to each other. But when you look at the whole picture, when you look at the whole painting, the whole game, the whole narrative, whatever whole you're thinking of at a particular moment, you start to realize that these things that you might have otherwise kept conceptually distinct from one another only make sense, only really work when considered as part of an entire complete composition. And composition is really sort of the important thing here because, you know, the title of the game is literally a term from art history. Like it is a thing that scholars talk about when talking about works of art. And so using this mode of composition of like how things all come together, even when they seem to be explicitly like against one another, whether it be conflicting characters, conflicting ideas, conflicting perspectives, the game I think is implicitly trying to tell you that these things aren't against each other, they are with each other. And the withness, the completeness of the game can only really be understood fully, or at least not fully, more fully, because again, you're always left in the dark about something. You can only understand it more fully if you see what appears to be a duality actually as a non-duality, as a whole, as perspectives on the same thing. And I think with that, we're going to kind of leave it there. Like I said, in our Patreon episode, we might be talking about more spoilery things. We'll definitely get into more detail about sort of a lot of the like aesthetic components. So, you know, we'll talk about the music, we'll talk about art versus how film is used. And like all that in the weeds stuff is going to be in the Patreon episode. So if you want to listen to that, you can go to patreon.com/furidashi. You can follow Lauren and myself on Blue Sky. Lauren is Espresso Cat. I am Academicality. Lauren, is there anything else you'd like to leave our delightful listeners with before we go?
I think the only thing I will leave you with is remembering that in these dark times, sometimes you have to also recognize that there is also lightness within them. So please, everybody, look at the whole picture of your life and do not just dwell on kind of the insanity of what is going on.